The U.S. will begin normalizing relations with Cuba after the release of Alan Gross, a U.S. contractor who has been a prisoner in Cuba since 2009. But the U.S. didn't always have a tense relationship with Cuba. When Fidel Castro first took power after overthrowing Cuban President Batista in 1959, America recognized the new government, and Castro later visited America and met with then Vice President Richard Nixon. Once back in Cuba, Fidel nationalized several companies with ties to the U.S. and began having close trade relations with the communist Soviet Union. In response, President Eisenhower severed all diplomatic relations at the beginning of 1961 and put an embargo on Cuban commodities like sugar, which the Soviet Union began to buy to save the Cuban economy, bringing the two closer together during the Cold War. The U.S.-Cuba relationship was strained even more with the failed Bay of Pigs invasion that involved 1,400 U.S.-trained Cuban exiles attempting to topple Castro. Cuba was a key focal point during the height of the Cold War around 1962. After the Soviet Union installed nuclear-armed missiles on the island, JFK ordered the U.S. Navy to blockade it to prevent Soviet ships from bringing in more weapons.
I have directed the armed forces to prepare for any eventualities.
The tense standoff ended a week later when Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles and Kennedy agreed not to invade Cuba. Since then, the U.S.-Cuban relations have remained strained, but with few flare-ups. Cuba allowed citizens to leave in 1980, causing a refugee crisis when 125,000 Cubans fled to the U.S. In 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, so did the Cuban economy. And 3 years later, when Cuba again allowed citizens to leave, 40,000 more Cubans came to America. The Elian Gonzalez custody battle in 2000 highlighted the strong divide among Cubans. Gonzalez's mother drowned while her and Elian were trying to reach the U.S. He was placed in the care of relatives in Miami who wanted to keep him in the U.S. His father, who was in Cuba, wanted him to be returned there. After a long court battle, Gonzalez was ordered to be returned to his father in Cuba, and Gonzalez was dramatically removed from his relative's home. Fidel Castro ceded his power to his brother Raul Castro in 2006 and officially resigned in 2008. At Nelson Mandela's funeral last year, a handshake between President Obama and Raul Castro sparked criticism from some Cuban-American lawmakers that it would become propaganda for Castro, while others thought that the gesture showed progress between the estranged countries. And with today's announcement of the normalizing relations, maybe it was more than just a handshake.
Una conversación telefónica